Welcome back to MidEast In-Depth, part of Levant TV's press reviews. US-Iraq ties may improve as a result of Nouri al-Maliki's resignation as Iraqi Prime Minister by Young writes in CCTV on the matter. Al-Maliki announced late Thursday that he decided to withdraw his nomination for a third term in office and back the nomination of Haider al-Abadi for the post of Prime Minister. Al-Maliki has been criticized for what many label as dividing the country. At the same time, Washington has urged Iraq to form an inclusive government. Wayne White, former Deputy Director of the State Department's Middle East Intelligence Office, told Xinhua on Saturday the removal of al-Maliki takes away the single biggest obstacle to improve US-Iraqi relations. And the writer argues indeed the Obama administration on Thursday praised al-Maliki for stepping down, and US Secretary of State John Kerry billed the move as essential to putting the country together and consolidating the efforts of Iraq's many diverse communities against the common threat of the Islamic State. Also on Iraq, The Telegraph features an article on the recent stance of the British Prime Minister on the ISIS in Iraq. Christopher Hope, senior political correspondent, looks into what Cameron calls, quote, a generational struggle against a poisonous ideology. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, the Prime Minister says the world cannot turn a blind eye to the creation of an extremist caliphate in the heart of Iraq. The West, he says, is embroiled in a generational struggle against a poisonous brand of Islamic extremism that will bring terror to the streets of Britain unless urgent action is taken to defeat it. And warning that Islamic State fighters already control thousands of square miles of territory, Mr. Cameron says that if these warped and barbaric extremists are not dealt with now, they will create a terrorist state on the shores of the Mediterranean. The Prime Minister says he fears the struggle will last the rest of my political lifetime. The creation of an extremist caliphate in the heart of Iraq and extending into Syria is not a problem miles away from home, nor is it a problem that should be defined by a war 10 years ago. It is our concern here and now. David Cameron warns that Britain will have to use its military prowess to help defeat this exceptionally dangerous movement, or else terrorists with murderous intent will target people in Britain. And now we are joined by political commentator William Spring. Welcome to MidEast In-Depth.
Hello.
The Prime Minister said Britain and the West need a firm security response to the crisis in Iraq and that fighters from the Islamic State, the ISIS, cannot simply be removed by airstrikes alone. What do you think of the Prime Minister's firm stance now?
Well, Cameron needs to get, if he's really got an intention of confronting ISIS, he needs to get a lot more people on board, particularly the Americans. The Americans seem to want to disengage from the Middle East. Their only concern about ISIS is to protect their client state in Kurdistan, I would call it, but there isn't a Kurdistan as such, is there? But the area where the Kurds are, the Americans want to protect that.
Why are they so concerned about the Kurds?
Well, they've always been a sort of, hard center of American policy in Iraq because they followed the American line in many respects. For example, there's an embassy for Israel in the Kurdistan regional area. Mm-hmm. So I think the Americans want to keep Kurdistan on board, but I think the Americans are entirely indifferent, and President Obama has no interest whatsoever in protecting Christians in Iraq. He may be interested in protecting Yazidis in a very limited way, if he can make a sort of news story out of it, because the Americans generally are quite ignorant of Yazidis, and this is a new phenomenon for them. And followers of the Purple Angel or whatever is something that really intrigues the Americans. But the idea that America will actually help Christians is absolutely absurd. I mean, they have never helped Christians, the Americans, at any time in their history, as far as I can see. And there was a very brief period when they were slightly more Christian than they are today. But at the moment, the Americans have no morals, no policy. They are simply concerned to maintain the oil flow from the Middle East. And this means keeping themselves on good terms with Saudi Arabia. And the ISIS movement, or the Islamic State, what that is purely an extension of the borders of Saudi Arabia. And the Americans will not want to upset that. They want to see another Islamic State, because they've got on very well with Saudi Arabia over the since 1922 or so on. And I think they would prefer to deal with the Saudis, and the ISIS is merely another version of the Saudis, because the Saudis have paid for the ISIS movement, and together with Qatar.
Yes.
So I would like to see some actual idealism in Washington, but there's no hope of that. They are a very cynical bunch and they've made sure that all their interest is in money and in oil and in maintaining the ISIS movement.
Back to Downing Street here. Do you think the Prime Minister liaised his step with the Americans before his speech?
No, I don't think he did. I think without the American support, it's extremely difficult to put a coalition together. Now, it may be possible. It may be possible, but the Americans will warn David Cameron off any confrontation with ISIS, because they see ISIS as their pet project, you see. They want to see, the Americans want to see an extension of the Saudi Arabian theocracy, if you like, in the Middle East. And consequently, if Cameron tries in any way whatsoever to deviate from the American line, he will come unstuck. So I think, though, the anger against ISIS in Britain and in France is so strong that it is possible that we might influence American policy. If the Americans have no principles, which evidently they haven't, because they are the ones who've allowed ISIS to develop, and ISIS, this offensive ISIS made several months ago, could not have been unknown by the American strategic analysts in Riyadh. They knew all about it before it happened. So, consequently, the British have to, and the Europeans, have to try and influence the Americans, and it's possible they might.
Yes. William Thring, political commentator, thank you very much for being on the show.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And for more updates, please visit our website, levant.tv. You could also subscribe to MidEast In-Depth on iTunes. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.